Welcome to By-The-Bywater, a podcast on the Megaphonic Network. I'm Ned Raggett.
I'm Oriana Schwint.
I'm Jared Pekacek.
And we're here to talk about all things J.R.R. Tolkien, his work, his inspirations and impact, creative interpretations in other media, languages, lore, rip-offs, parodies, anything we think is interesting. Thanks for joining us. Hello and welcome to the 70th episode of By-The-Bywater. It is great to be back with you all, and I am not jealous or anything, but my co-hosts have both seen Nosferatu before me, and I'm annoyed, but I'll be catching up with it tomorrow. Although opinions on it differ between the two, so...
That is true.
They do. They really do.
Was it something that was good and entertaining, or was it something pointlessly done? I'll let you decide which one was which, unless they choose to tell it themselves.
I will say, I feel like Oriana and I maybe think the same things about it.
Yeah.
I just like it and she doesn't.
Yeah.
I feel it's what's happening.
Yeah, I feel like we've come to different conclusions based on the same data, roughly.
I think so.
Well, I think we don't even really disagree all that much. It is just kind of a matter of personal taste, I think.
Yeah.
Like, I very much respect Jared's opinion. even if he's wrong.
And you see, this is how scientific data is used to good effect, and everyone has the proper conclusions. This is how it is. This is how debates are both put into place and then settled.
As my colleague has said, it's in a very convincing paper.
The distinguished person on my left, etc. Things like that. So, well, we hope you've all had a good time. We would also like to remind you all that if you are one of our Patreon listeners, hey, we hope you had a chance to listen to the bonus Patreon-only thing for the Megaphonic Network that both Jared and I were on, the greatest podcast ever recorded, which came out with its most recent episode last week, as he and I, along with various other folks on the network, like Chris and S and Mikey, all talked about the 1976 film Wonton Ton, The Dog That Saved Hollywood. It was bad,
it's
but we had a time talking about it, that's for sure. So by all means, catch up with that. The other thing I would like to point out is that the wonderful podcast on the network, The Spouter Inn, recently got around to doing Return of the King, having looked at the previous two parts of Lord of the Rings beforehand, and in the same way that both Oriana and Jared recorded bonus episodes for The Spouter Inn, I did one myself with them for Return of the King. So be sure to check out The Spouter Inn. They're also on Blue Sky. They're on the network here. Chris and Suzanne are, of course, wonderful hosts, and it was great to be able to sort of see out that cycle and have a chance to talk about the book in a different way this time with different hosts. As I said to Chris at the time, it was interesting hearing Chris read the introduction to the podcast episode that I always do in the preset bit instead of me. It was like, wow, this is weird. This is not my voice. So, in any event, we've all been doing, as well as can be, recording this just before the new year. So by the time this lands, we'll have gone through it and getting on through things. And that means it's time to talk about news, such as there is. And there isn't much, but there's something. So, Jared, please go ahead and take it away.
It was hard to dig up any news on Tolkien from the past month, which wasn't about the War of the Rohirrim, unsurprisingly. But besides an annoying Ross Duthot essay and other such nonsense, there is one truly tragic bit of news. Sadly, it appears that the Rings of Power is indeed being renewed.
No.
Thoughts and prayers, our hearts are with you all in this time. There still hasn't been any formal announcement at the time of recording, which honestly feels increasingly hilarious. But per an interview with Screen Rant in early December, the showrunners indicated it was happening, with J.D. McKay quoted as saying that we're prepping now very intensely, and it's, quote, gonna be real good, unquote. Call us skeptical. In the meantime, we highly recommend Will Talvin's recent essay for N+1 Casual Viewing about how streaming has changed movie and television making. And while it's mostly about Netflix, we couldn't help but appreciate the anonymous former Amazon executive who was quoted as saying, "The number of things that tank on Amazon is remarkable. There are so many things that people hardly watch, and it would be embarrassing to release those streaming numbers." Sounds about right.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
completely.
at least, you know, I will say this about the Rings of Power being renewed. That means a bunch of people are going to have jobs for a while, and that's nice. They get to do cool things, craft things and costumes and sets, and, you know, that's nice. That's nice.
Actors I appreciate are still getting work.
Right? That's
There's-
good.
yeah.
Even it's good to have writers who are employed.
Yeah.
All right.
And I still haven't watched season 2, but I do think that there's a ton of there's a ton of technical talent on display, and
For
it's
sure.
good to have them working too.
Yeah.
Even if I dislike the series, it's
Right,
I
all
wouldn't
your
want,
gaffers,
John
all your
Howe
grips,
to be out of work or whatever.
Right? Yeah.
The fact that we were hoping for all this rather than hoping for anything to do with the story itself kind of shows you where we're at. We're in for people being employed. We're not in for whatever decisions
It's a
are being
jobs
cooked
program, a Tolkien-themed jobs program. That's fine. It's fine.
It's like building a bridge in the 30s or whatever. It's just to give.
Least we can do. So, in any event, so with that said, again, wasn't much else besides talking about, hey, what we're going to talk about today. So, no reason not to get into it, and let's do that. So, I will begin. Before beginning anything, I have to once more mention a disclaimer, given anything I may be saying about The Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim, to give the full official title of the film. I've been a casual but friendly online acquaintance of one of the film's producers for a number of years now, Jason DeMarco, who has had a long-established career in animation via various Warner Brothers interests, starting with TNT and Toonami, then Adult Swim and Cartoon Network in general, and for some years now, he's been the Senior Vice President for Anime and Action Series and Long-Form for Warner Brothers Animation as a whole. He's a complete music nerd like me, which is how we met on Twitter some long while back, and while it's been some months since we last chatted directly, we could honestly carry out a conversation about music and many other things without mentioning Tolkien once. Knowing, of course, that the level of NDAs around the movie's production would mean I couldn't ask him about anything much anyway. The only time I've directly asked him about it, aside from a couple of quick check-ins on their Annecy Festival showcases over the past couple of years, was shortly after the movie's original announcement and his involvement, just for my curiosity. My thoughts on the film are wholly my own. So what is this film? As with so much in the 21st century and Tolkien adaptations of any sort, a key reason it exists is, simply put, rights. Having done both The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit adaptation by Jackson, Warner Brothers wanted to continue its overall development license for work derived from those two books, a license held at the time by the company which had had it for years, Middle-earth Enterprises, owned by the Saul Zaentz Company. The decision was made to do this via an animated movie rather than via live action, with Phillippa Boyens, one of the key screenwriters and creative and production team members of the live-action films, along, of course, with Peter Jackson and Fran Walsh, being the main creative point person on the script and story side, as the film would be in specific continuity with the 6 live-action films. Per a quote from Boyens, there had been some general idea of an animated project for a while, but the ultimate decision was to make the film as a theatrically released anime in particular, reflecting how the Japanese approach to animation has long grown out of its cult followings in the US and elsewhere into a recognized and wildly popular form and style worldwide. With Jason DeMarco as a producer, given his own experience in such popularization, the creative team on the anime side would be the partnership of Kenji Kamiyama on direction and Joseph Chow on production, the two having worked earlier with Warner Brothers on the Blade Runner Black Lotus series. The movie was announced as a fast-tracked production in 2021, with a release date in 2024, initially in April, but changed after the 2023 Hollywood Guild strikes to December. Kamiyama is a long-established veteran in the anime field, with initial work dating back to the late 80s, whose own high-profile breakthrough was the sequel series Ghost in the Shell standalone complex, starting in 2002, followed in 2009 by a wholly original work, Eden of the East. Kamiyama has worked on a variety of series and films regularly since, including more Ghost in the Shell work, Ultraman, and an entry in the Star Wars Visions anthology, among others. Cho, meanwhile, is the CEO of Sola Digital Arts, a Japanese animation studio founded in 2009, who have worked on various different projects, including a number of Kamiyama's more recent series and films, up to and including the Blade Runner series. As is standard practice, numerous other houses contributed further work under Kamiyama and Sola's direction to create the final film. Meantime, for the story of the film itself, Boyens suggested a focus on Rohan and its history, taking advantage of the section in the Lord of the Rings appendices called The House of Earl, detailing just this. The specific story of the king Helm Hammerhand and a destructive civil war, 2 centuries before the events of The Lord of the Rings, is one of the most detailed in that section, down to including dialogue between characters. And the creative team went from there, with an initial script team laying groundwork before another team, rather handily including Boyens' daughter, Phoebe Gittins, created the final result. The film's main voice cast is for the most part British, the most well-known of whom would be veteran actor Brian Cox, recently famed for his work on Succession as Helm himself. The lead role of Helm's daughter, Héra, went to a young actress, Gaia Wise, who has appeared in a variety of UK-based films and TV shows. The chief antagonist, Wolf, was voiced by Luke Pasqualino, who's been similarly working steadily over a number of years in those fields, as well as gaining more notice in recent shows such as Shadow and Bone and Rivals, among others. Miranda Otto reprised her role as Éowyn as the movie's narrator, while the character of Olwen, Héra's chief servant and fellow warrior, was played by Lorraine Ashburn, a veteran actress since the 1980s who provided another indirect connection to the Jackson live-action films. Her husband of many years is some guy you might have heard of named Andy Serkis. The film's release in mid-December 2024 found it a little overshadowed by some massive hits in terms of attention and publicity. In late November, the live-action adaptation of the first part of Wicked, rapidly followed by the smash release of Disney's major animated effort for the year's end, Moana 2, formed one bookend, while the 1-2 of Paramount's Sonic 3 and another Disney effort, Mufasa, just prior to Christmas, formed the other. Though War of the Rohirrim was given a theatrical release as planned, its reception was generally mixed, and after placing fifth its opening weekend, it was given a digital release 2 weeks later and can be viewed at home now, presumably with a future streaming presence on Max to follow. The license previously held by Middle-earth Enterprises is now held by Embracer, and David Zaslav's Warner Brothers is now pursuing live-action projects. So whether this film, the fourth major animated adaptation of Tolkien overall, and the third to feature significant input from Japanese animators, following both of the Rankin Bass films, is going to be something of a one-off, is unclear for now. But now it's time to open up the floor and, well, what do we all think, I guess?
Well, so I saw 2 movies this past week. One was a lovingly crafted homage to a fantasy classic, and the other was War of the Rohirrim. I made the same joke on Blue Sky. Who cares? It was fine, is the thing.
Yeah.
Like, it wasn't. Yeah, my initial. I walked out of it and was like, okay, and forgot about it.
Yeah, it's something. I am the most positive of the three of us, based on our initial reactions. But that positivity was, it's a film that I think backing up is sort of swallowed by a huge context here. And that context, as we've talked about in previous episodes, is that there's just too much Tolkien in a weird way, which is something really weird to say, but is also really true. I thought more than once that this film would have almost certainly gotten more attention and maybe even more positive reaction if it had been the only film released since the original trilogy of films by Jackson. If for some reason it had been 2+ decades and they had come back with this, then while I think there would have been still some sort of about this, the fact that we wouldn't have had the of the Hobbit adaptations and the glumph that is the Rings of Power more recently kicking it all up would have lent this a relative kind of freshness. I emphasize relative, even though, of course, part of the issue with it is that it's so locked down to the original Jackson trilogy that it's really hard for it to go anywhere in many cases.
Yeah. I was very surprised that I did not like the look of the thing. I think so. I'm gonna guess like most of our listeners didn't actually see it. Maybe by the time this episode comes out, it'll be on Max or something. But the style just did not work for me. It's these very like watercolor, beautiful like painting backgrounds. And a frankly ugly animation style to me, or rather a less fluid animation style overlaid. It just, the way the camera moves, quote unquote camera, it's like it's trying to be realistic without actually having an underlying handle on the physics of how bodies move and how weight works. It's just funny to think about Studio Ghibli movies where the physics are so good that you can have a character that isn't really, there's not that much to the character, like, line wise, but the way that they move is so anchored in the physics that they feel realer than they are. And that just does not, for me, that I just was really missing that. And it really took me out of a lot of sequences. Not even getting into the story of it all, like, it just visually was not working for me. That was the thing that I was most looking forward to going into this. I was like, at least it will be pretty and really beautiful, and we'll have that. But it just didn't work for me. I'm sure people worked very hard on it for long periods of time and put in. I bet those people were pretty good at their jobs too. It just didn't work.
Yeah, there are. So I've obviously. Long-time listeners will know how often I complain about everything being locked into the Alan Lee, John Howe thing.
Right.
But this goes further by having almost all the backgrounds be almost just like painted screenshots from the trilogy.
Yep.
To the point where I think this episode is going to be spoiler territory. It's safe to say.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
There's a point where the Edoras and Meduseld in this movie are the exact same Edoras and Meduseld from the Jackson movies, even though they are destroyed in the course of the movie.
Yeah.
Edoras is burned.
Yeah.
Meduseld is in total ruins. And then they rebuild it exactly. You don't see this happen, but this is implied to have happened. They rebuild it exactly the same way for the movies. So it's like, it's so enthralled to this thing, but at the same time, with those backgrounds, which are beautiful, even if they are exactly the same thing we've already seen before. And this might have been some of what was bothering you, Oriana, is the character designs don't match.
Yeah.
They are coming from a different reality. Their aesthetic is more fantasy anime. Yeah. If that makes it, which is not inherently bad. That is not what I'm saying.
Love that.
It's
love that
more
stuff.
that they don't match the more, I don't want to say authentically medieval, because that's not quite what the movies are doing either. But there's not that sort of historic quality to them. They look like they're coming from a different history. Yeah. So you have things like the main character Héra running around in thigh-high boots and like a tunic, which breaks. Like, this is not. Like, I'm not trying to say it's historically inaccurate because this is fantasy. That doesn't, it's got dragons. Who cares if it's accurate? But it feels inaccurate to the reality of this world that we're presented with. So it ends up being jarring. Every time I watched a character do something, I was like, what are they wearing? Yeah. And it is distracting. And I think if these characters drawn this way were in a different setting, I wouldn't be bothered by them. But here I am.
Right. Like, the meta-narrative is that Éowyn is telling this story to question mark her own children. We don't, we don't know. Right. But it is situated in a meta-narrative where, Jared, as you say, you could have gotten away with, this is a story and this is the visual style that we are doing with this story. So, it's weird to me that they went with these, not photoreal, but like painting real backgrounds and whatnot, but also even the animation of the motions and the, again, quote unquote, camera movements within the animation, just absolutely not. Like, there's a couple shots I feel like where the camera like races along with the, it's like POV of being on a horse, and that was so jarring and not good.
There's weird scale issues a lot of the time where, like, we get Oliphants in here, or Mumakil rather, which are great, but also sometimes they're kind of small, and sometimes they're these towering menaces, and sometimes a horse can go under them, and sometimes a horse seems to almost be the same size as them. Yeah. It's you can tell it was, I don't know if you can actually tell, but it feels like it was rushed.
Yes, because I bet the people who were doing this are pretty good at their jobs. Yeah. And, if given the proper time, I'm going to guess, that would be much less of a problem. And also, again, if if the rest of the stuff kind of in the background and whatnot had been less realistic, maybe our brains would have been less inclined to notice that kind of thing. Maybe.
But also, I mean, there is stuff like there's some pretty janky horse animation.
Yes,
which for a movie about Rohan
It took me out.
Well, I was going to throw in something sort of building off a couple of your points here. Yeah, the question of overfamiliarity is a good one. Now, there were certainly moments where I thought there were sort of striking ways to sort of reinterpret what we've seen before, at least briefly. This shot was in the trailer, but I did like the Milky Way behind Edoras moment, because that's something that's, we don't get that in the Jackson films. So that's I kind of like that. It's almost a recognition of something which, to be fair, really isn't really shown at all in any of the Jackson films. It's like, no, that night sky would be full of stars all the time. A pre-industrial civilization. That was sort of like, oh wow, that I thought was visually very interesting. But maybe to sort of come to a key point about the background, and this touches on story, but it's also again to do with what we already know. Again, for better or for worse, this is in continuity. The film essentially revolves around, for the most part, a bit of like the open plains aside, 4 locations. That would be Edoras, Dunharrow, Helm's Deep, and Orthanc, Isengard, and that's kind of it. All of which, of course, were all incredibly well established one way or another in the Jackson films. Now, to be fair, these are all key locations in the original story. No one's going to deny it. I mean, it's sort of like, well, Tolkien wrote it. There you go. So I'm not saying they would have to change that, but it might have been interesting if there had been some care taken into some other place that had not been as well established, or just to show something that maybe was, looked like what something was, but still, it was still noticeably different. Your point about how Edoras could literally look different beforehand, I think would have been a good idea. I think, an argument could be made that the this first era of Edoras and Medicel and all that could be something maybe even rougher than what we see, precisely because it's sort of like, well, let's rebuild it and rebuild it grander than before, a symbol of our victory, things like that, which I think would have been a nice way to sort of distinguish, sort of a rising from the ashes narrative in some particular way. So there's that too. But it's one of those things that on the one hand, I didn't mind it, but what I found, especially in looking in some of the locations, was I found myself looking at a number of the rooms going like, have I seen this room before or this location before in the films? And if so, how is it? What's the? It's sort of like I was like, okay, is this something in the background shot? Is this that room, or this is another room? Is it? Have they redressed it? Like, so a lot of the scenes, the bits in the tower in Orthanc, I'm like, is that one room? And I was trying to get a sense of it, and I couldn't quite. So that took me out of the film, because admittedly it was more analytical because I was trying to do that. But it was a weird way where something is trying to be familiar, and yet in its working out, makes you end up getting lost and thinking about the other things even more. So when you should be paying attention to the story. So it's kind of odd.
Yeah, well, and I think that also the marketing itself attempted to do that to us all, and I think that was a huge mistake. Like, the core of your marketing can't be like all of the video marketing that I saw surrounding this film started with live action shots from the two towers of Rohan, and it wasn't even Rohirrim. Like, it was like, Aragorn and like it was Gimli, and that's the start. And like, I understand the connection they're trying to make, but how are you going to expect people to not make those comparisons, not kind of be constantly thinking about this other story that you've already told? It just, I think that was a big mistake, and I think that fed into a lot of, taking yourself out of the movie and comparing things that, like, there's no reason to be doing that, but the story's kind of weak, and the mind wanders.
You have time to get distracted is part of the problem.
Yeah.
I will say, I mean, having nitpicked a bunch of the visuals, there are some things. There are some stuff. I know how to speak. That are, I thought, really incredible. Like, there's a lot of the stuff having to do with the Eagles I thought was really great. And there's the sort of the lowest point of the movie during the siege at Helm's Deep. Like, Helm is going out and killing people at night. And I was like engaged for that, partly because I couldn't see anything that I had seen before.
Yeah, right. It's like spooky and
he's creepy. It's surprisingly gory.
Yeah.
There's a fight with a snow troll, I assume is what it is, that I thought was actually pretty good. It does have its moments.
Yeah. For me, there's no question about it. I mean, I actually thought one of the more engaging sequences, obviously, the Jackson films had battles at night because the Helm's Deep battle is a night battle in Two Towers. And obviously there are some night sequences, including a key one at the end in there, which, let's be fair, more than one time it's sort of like, well, there's your fan service. But the sequence that happened at night that I enjoyed was the battle outside Edoras with the different glowing torches of lights, which was a way to sort of distinguish them apart. And there were scenes there that, even if some of the things could be rough, it's sort of like, okay, this is interesting, seeing the writer's dynamics, but seeing it where it's something where it's at night. You could think in going wrong, you could have something that's like, well, it's nothing pitch black. Instead, it was shaded just enough so you could still see what was going on. But again, having it be something where it was like these different torch lights, these different things going, is sort of like, especially also observed from a distance. I thought that's a really nice. That's a twist. I like that. It suggested something like for instance, like the famous thing in Two Towers where it's the marching of the Uruk-hai and the torches coming towards Helm's Deep. There was a hint of that, but it didn't stick there because it was much smaller, and that was it. That avoided a key problem with the Hobbit as filmed, which is like, let's try and replicate the Battle of Minas Tirith and the Battle of Five Armies.
Yeah, just do it all over again. Why not?
Yeah. Instead, they said like, okay, this is clearly a battle, but it's a smaller battle. It is not a larger one. It is something that's sort of like, okay, these scopes, it's high stakes, but it's in a different scale and it's different people. There aren't different creatures involved, et cetera, that type of thing.
Yeah, I did think the Fall of Edoras was really good. There were a few moments where it was like, you're watching a character do something and you're like, this is such a stupid thing. Like the king's son, Héra's brother, like standing very visible on top of something, just begging to get shot. And then he gets shot.
Through the throat.
Which was like effective when he actually died. But while he's like, I'm up here exulting in my victory, I'm just like, guys, there are archers out here.
And in the original text of the story, and we can certainly get into the story here in a bit, the idea is that he dies fighting before the doors. To my mind, that I always read that as literally like it was fighting off like, some swordsman thing before the doors.
Doing a sort of last stand kind of thing.
Yeah, that sort of thing.
Which is just as powerful. I don't know.
But what can you do? So
in isolation as an action sequence, I really like it. I do feel like you said, it's a little bit, I don't know.
It is what it is.
It is what it is.
Since we've been sort of talking about the background, let's get to the story. So again, as indicated, we have in Tolkien the bones of the story, as much as he wrote and published out. And it's kind of basic, but it's there. And we do have even that initial dialogue that we get between Freka and Helm, down to the fat joke, har har, and all that. And which I did always like that the movie kind of conveyed sort of a key thing, namely that whatever else about Helm, who's kind of an asshole.
I wish they'd leaned just a little harder into it. Like, it was so close. It was so close to be like, I actually like his reaction to having killed Freka, where he's like, well, I only hit him once. Like, there's no way. Like, that's not my fault.
Maybe he shouldn't have had such a weak skull.
That's pretty, like, I just wish it had been just a little more, like, again, with the character design where we've kind of very firmly come down on the side of, like, look at this gross fat slob,
this gross fat guy,
nasty, like, maybe he didn't deserve to die, but like, look at how hard he was hitting Helm. So, Helm had no choice, really. It's a little like, okay, fine.
Well, it's important to note, too, and I had almost forgotten this until I re-listened, actually. I listened to the circus reading of that House of Oral section where what happens is that they go out for the discussion, and Helm basically says something and then just punches him, and that's it. Freka does not strike first.
I feel that felt like a studio note to me. That felt like a studio note where they were like, no, this guy has to, like, Helm has to be kind of, like, hitting back.
Provoked.
He's got to be more of an anti-hero than the instigator of this.
Right, type thing. So that was kind of loaded there. But as we all saw when the story started, it actually starts with its clear lead character, a good old Héra, which name aside.
Name! I know you just said name aside, but God, please, what is this name?
Somehow it didn't end up bothering me that much. I guess maybe,
here.
when they said Héra,
so
it's like, oh, okay, fine.
Well, so it's bothered me the entire time because it's not like it doesn't match the content. It's a bad, but also because everybody was really trying to do the R correctly and not always succeeding. Half the time it sounded like they were saying Héra, and I'm like, every time I'm like, Hopper.
There's your Hollywood.
and I know that maybe that's just a me problem, but it was so distracting having people sometimes pronounce it just like Héra.
Writing her own SNL sketch here.
Look, I would watch Hedda Hopper fight legions of.
I mean,
whatever.
Why couldn't she do that?
Sure.
So,
yeah.
But I mean, so here's the thing. I made this argument, and maybe I'm wrong. But what I thought, and it could be entirely wrong. But I thought the smartest, quote unquote, thing, or one of the smartest things they did, was that it wasn't just her. That we had the character of Olwen invented for a story, and that we had also kind of my favorite character, that old crone in Helm's Deep, who was kind of awesome and who I would have loved to have seen more from. She was pretty great. But in the fact that we had actually two notable characters who were women in the story, whereas of course in the original story there's only the unnamed daughter and things like that. And I will allow for this much. Usually the framing is you've just got one character is a woman against all the dudes, and there were moments where that dynamic was playing out, and I'm like, I so don't care and all that. So having people where there were sort of like people just talking, about things, avoiding a Bechdel moment, for what I could tell, kind of, not all the time. So, but since there's the whole wolf thing, but that actually was something that's like, okay, you're trying. You're trying to make this work so you can do something more with the story, but I'll allow it. It was nice to see. It could have been worse. Am I wrong, though? Do you read it differently?
I think the problem for me is that Héra starts out as the stereotypical, not like other girls. She just wants to ride around, wear pants. Mm-hmm. It's very like 80s fantasy, like a Tamara Pierce book in a way.
Okay, yeah.
Not disparaging Tamara Pierce, but it's that kind of thing where... Anyway, and then that's how she ends the story, too.
Yeah.
There's she doesn't change. She stays the same kind of like, I'm not like other girls thing, which is bananas when you clearly have lots of not like other girls already here, like Olwen or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So that bothered me. And it also bothered me that, and this is something I know Oriana talks about a lot, and maybe Oriana wants to take up this thread, but that kind of like a woman having power and agency only through the exercise of violence.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Right. No, I mean, yeah.
So there was all of that, and there kept being moments where I was like, even if she is a tomboy, I don't think she would do this. Whereas, she, very early on, it's time for the big council, right before Helm kills Freka, and Olwen walks into the stable and is like, you have to change. And Hera's like, what's wrong with what I've got on?
Yeah.
And it's like, a princess would not fucking say that.
She would know.
She would know.
She would be
even if she's
if
she's mad about it, she would know. She wouldn't ask this really stupid, and genuine, it's not a sarcastic question. She's like, "What's wrong with this? Were you born yesterday?" And that instantly, I was like, and this isn't first 5 minutes of the movie. I was like, "Oh God, what are we in for?" And it did get better after that. But there's another moment where there's a very significant wax seal that she sees in the enemy lair, and she's like, I don't know what that is. And then later on, she has to ask somebody. And this, again, we're kind of venturing into it's not historically accurate, which, again, is not what I'm trying to say. But I feel like a princess, a late teenager, I don't know her age, she's been here for years, is the point. She's lived at court for years, and she doesn't recognize the seal of a prominent Rohan lord.
So prominent,
too. He's ask...
He's her father's closest advisor, it looks like.
Yeah. And she has to ask this bumbling boy who this seal is.
Him I have a problem with.
Yeah. There were all of these moments where it's like you were trying to write a strong female protagonist, but you accidentally kind of made just a stupid female protagonist.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's fair.
that was-
That's
And
more
she
than
is,
fair.
she's
More than
given
fair.
moments where she's intelligent and resourceful and all of that, and that's great. But there were all these things where she's not written as a character. She is often written as a plot device. She's
Yeah.
resourceful when she's resourceful.
Mhm.
She is despairing when we need a low moment. She is violent when we need violence, and not in a way that makes sense for her character, but more like, oh, the screenplay, oh, we're different page. Like she has this moment where
we
her
need
dead
a fight
brothers-
sequence.
We need a fight sequence. Like her
Right.
dead brother has this lyre or harp or whatever that she's like, just burn it. There's no hope left. And then within the same scene, suddenly she's like, don't give up, Dad.
Yeah.
There's still hope. And I'm like, what are we doing here?
Mhm.
Right,
So-
right.
Yeah, that was my rant. Anybody else want to say?
It's a good rant. So-
Yeah, I no longer give movies or TV shows like points for just having more female characters than the source material. That feels a little table stakesy to me. But yeah, Jared, I think you kind of nailed a lot of the things that I was just the Shield Maiden thing, where it's like,
that
we have to explain. First of all, treating the Shield Maidens as like a house unto itself, more or less, instead of just a tradition that goes back to the mists of antiquity, particularly in this group of people. Like, this is not a weird thing for them, or it should, like, and for
to ironically interrupt you, but what is the patriarchy in this movie? Is there one or isn't there? Sometimes Helm is like, oh, a daughter, she's good for nothing. And other times he's like, oh my God, you're the light of my life, never leave me. What is going? It's like
very
the movie,
weird.
Yeah, he's like misogynist when we need Héra to be
oppressed.
hurt. Yeah, and then he's like, you're the best thing, you're my favorite, whenever we need her to be supported. And it's like, you can't give the same character those. And I know people in real life who kind of flip-flop between, oh, I love the women in my life, and like, women be shopping. Like, I know that.
Yes.
But that's not what this is. This is more like, it's the screenplay going, oh, we need this moment now. Now that I, a man, have interrupted you, please continue.
But it is like, yes, people hold opposing views quite, all the time. And it's difficult to kind of show both sides, which is why it's easier to just not do that. If Helm had just had this sort of paternalistic love and been like, Harry, you're only good for marrying, except, I need you to actually but you're too good to marry Wolf. And, but the Shield Maiden thing was just so bizarre to me that like anyone would need this explained to them, and that it is a like group of women that doesn't exist anymore. And like, it's very, very odd to me. And it feels at odds with like what we know about the Rohirrim in general. Very, very strange. I feel like there was another. Oh, we'll talk about the Dunlendings at one point, because there was something they did that character design wise that I did actually really like, which is Freyalaf clearly has Dunlendingness in him.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I thought that was great. I thought it was nice that we have a Dunlending, Rohirrim mixed character who is a good guy. That's cool.
Yeah. The Dunlending thing. I was worried.
Yeah,
my concerns were not done away with.
No, not
because they. Again, I was like, do we trust white New Zealanders to write this? And I guess I was right not to trust them. They don't do anything like blisteringly offensive with it.
No, it's just staying the course, kind of.
Yeah, it's bothersome to me that they don't. And I know this is kind of equivalent to doing a land acknowledgement, but at no point do they go, Gondor gave us the Dunlendings' land. They don't acknowledge the grievance that is at the center of this war.
Yeah.
So the Dunlendings come across as just kind of out to kill, and they're out for gold.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, they want their land back that was taken from them by an imperial power and given to the imperial power's allies, and that is a legitimate grievance.
Yeah, and other than Freyalaf, like, all of the Dunlending warriors that we see are ugly as sin.
Some of them have, like, sharpened teeth.
And
I don't know if that's...
I guess
I don't think you can just throw that in there without context, because it makes them look very animalistic. And there are cultures in the world that do that on purpose, and that's fine. But if you're doing that, I think you got to be more careful about what you're playing with.
You have to show us that they're people with a culture,
rather than a faceless horde. Yeah, so that is all happening, and there's like the one good. He's kind of a bad guy. He's the general of the Dunleys or whatever. Yeah. But he's visually a little bit different. He's much more human looking. He has this code of honor that nobody else has. I will say, he's extremely good looking. I was into that.
Yeah.
But,
they did him well.
They did it well. Anyway, is it hot in here? But it's like you can't have the one guy and then everybody else is just a mess.
Yeah, just kind of.
Yeah, and like you said, or they stayed the course. It's like they weren't doing worse than anybody else has, but they certainly didn't do better.
Yeah, it was just a shame because I felt like it felt like they almost wanted to, but then they didn't, and I don't know what happened there. Again, was that a studio thing where they started in one direction and some studio executive or I don't know who, someone higher up was just like, no, this is not a thing that no, this doesn't work for us. I don't know.
Yeah, and we know it's not like The Hobbit or The Rings of Power where they only have the rights to certain concepts, because this is all in Lord of the Rings. It's all in the appendices. Right. They could have worked with this. They could have expanded on it the way they expanded on other things. Like the Shield Maiden thing. None of that, as it stands in the movie, none of that is in the book. Right. So they clearly are comfortable inventing.
The creature in the lake or whatever.
Yeah, and even, I will say, what is it, the Two Towers? Even the Two Towers is like, they took your land, like Saruman is rousing the rabble with, they took your land, and it doesn't work very well there either. But that kind of, they were holding space for it. And this movie does not hold that same space. I hate myself for saying that phrase. Good podcast, everyone.
It would have been so funny if listeners, Fuchsia is sitting right behind Jared, and it would have been so funny if she had batted his head as he said that. Just a little bat, bat, bat.
Can't believe you would do
it. We're going to have to train her to do just that. So there's your cat of Queen Beruthiel right there. You touched on the good old Watcher in the Water, or however you want to name it there. Yeah, let's, it's without getting into all the fan service that's obviously in there. Obviously, there are the moments there where it's sort of like, and this is a comment I made, where it doesn't feel so much like a Tolkien story as it does a Dungeons and Dragons story. And that and that's not meant to be dismissive of something that, hey, I was heavily into when I first got into Tolkien as well. Just sort of like, what is this thing? So, but it's sort of it's hard sometimes to allow yourself the proper gradation between, let's say, these two styles of fantasy. But in Dungeons and Dragons, you do get more of a sense of, you turn a corner and there's some big heaving monster, type thing and all that. You get this little sense of, oh, there's this creature over here in this lake, and I admit, I like the touch that the island is in fact his little toupee or whatever he's wearing. So cute, and that was very D&D, it should be noted, in terms of some of the things that monster descriptions I've seen over time. But with that aside, it's one of those cases where you sort of like, it took me out in the sense of sort of like, well, if I saw this in some other movie, I might not mind.
No, I liked that. I liked that sequence a lot, considered on its own, especially because
on its own,
you get the basically rabid elephant chasing Héra around, and then she leads it to the lake where the Watchers. And there's this fake out where somebody, I think it's Freyloff, is like, "Don't go in there. You know what lives in those woods." And she's like, "I know." And you think, the Ents. And then it's this weird
good point.
Watcher
I hadn't even thought about
water.
that.
So and then she guides it to the pool where it lives and awakens the Watcher, and it sees the elephant and is like, a threat, and grabs it. And it's like this really, really viscerally horrifying sequence as it just pulls the elephant in, and the elephant is shrieking and flailing and all of a sudden very pathetic and terrified. And you just sit there and watch as this bigger monster consumes it. And I was like, oh my God. But in a good, it's horrifying, but I was into it. And it's a bold move.
Very bold.
Yeah, I liked it. I don't think it belonged in this movie, but I thought it was great on its own.
Yeah, and I mean, we talked about the Eagles earlier, and I'm not minding. I'm not minding, but I'm not sold. I guess is kind of where I'm with them. So
I lost. It's the first 30 seconds of the movie. She pulls out this cartoonish ham or whatever.
Yeah. Yes. When I saw that, I'm like, what the hell am I seeing here? Exactly my reaction. I'm like, where are we going?
It was like a Looney Tunes ham.
Yes.
I don't know what was going on.
Totally was.
That's what, the physics here. What are we doing?
Yeah. How does she hold it up? That's gotta be. This
has got to be 20, 30 pounds.
Yeah. I appreciated that the Eagles had to be basically begged for help.
Yeah.
And that they are terrifying.
Yeah. That one shot where she crawls up to the spot of the ledge above Helm's Deep, and then we see the full shot of the Eagle. The Eagle's looking down at you like, you are nothing. It's just this terrifying look. Yeah, completely agreed. Yeah, that was quite striking and quite something.
I did feel it, to me, it felt a little reductive. I don't know if that's the right word, where it's like, oh, we need the Eagles' help to basically just deliver a message.
Deliver some armor.
When Héra found the escape route, I thought she was going to go to Dunharrow. But no, instead we had to go. I don't know, man. I don't know.
We should emphasize to people that nearly all of this is totally invented in the story. All we have is that pretty much the spring thaw comes, and that's when Freyalof rides out from Dunharrow and is able to face the troops and things. We don't have any of these extra. They're invented for story. And again, they can work and they can't work. And
his daughter
one
does
kind
nothing
of
in the original.
Yeah, and
so,
I understand that waiting for spring is really not the narrative that. It just doesn't make for a good movie, really. It could, but I don't know.
One of the things that I remember very viscerally from the little bit in the appendices, because it's really not that long, is that Helm's Deep is besieged for a winter so long it's called the Long Winter. It is this grinding thing, and everybody is tired of it by the end. And the movie is too interested in action that you don't get that same sense of things just running out.
Yeah, they touch on it, but you're right. It's not really dwelled on. Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah. And it all has to build up to another siege moment and breaking in, kind of, and things like that. So, which is like, I suppose they'd have to build the tower, wouldn't they?
Yeah, I don't mind the siege tower and all that. Yeah. What I do mind is the intense compression of the timeline to the point where it's like, is this 2 days later?
Yeah,
I don't know. Or the sequence that I did say I liked, where Helm is sneaking out every night to kill people. It kind of seems like it's 1 or 2 nights, and it doesn't. I think it's more powerful if you space it out, build it up a little bit more, and we wouldn't have to deal with all of this really painful man pain that Wolf is going through.
Yeah,
which is
Oh man, I feel like they did him dirty. He's just an incel. That's it. That's the end of the story.
Yeah, he's
so
doomed by the narrative.
It's so boring.
It would have been. Yeah, that was that sort of weird twist how things were sort of falling apart on the side of the Dunlendings, at least at the higher levels, was like, I don't know, seems to be weird shifts in motivation here, and then this sort of final unneeded internal conflict and things like that. So it was sort of like, and then, building up, real hyper emphasizing, we once played together as kids and now, and I'm like, you didn't need that. I think that these were elements, again, that could easily come from other stories, but I just don't think they necessarily worked out of place here. They almost felt like tropes brought in. Though I will say separately that in a weird way, and I want to give credence to what Kamiyama and his team are doing, is that in the moments of the script that felt the most anime melodrama were kind of the best, precisely because that's exactly what they know how to do. It's kind of like, let's get in some really intense looks or some things like that. It's sort of like, okay, we're as I said in my intro, we're much more familiar with that kind of film language and that kind of style of language. These are the type of beats that sort of connect in. And when you saw that, it sort of shifted. Not that I ever got a sense that this was, produced by, because it wasn't. I didn't get a sense it was produced by a bunch of, say, American fans trying to do anime. But there were moments instead where the creative team in Japan that did all this, working from a script from a bunch of New Zealanders, were able to go like, and whoever else, were going like, okay, let's really put our own stamp on this sort of thing, which reminds me of occasional moments in the Rankin Bass adaptations, but even much more so now here, because that's because they had more control over how they were doing it all the way through. We haven't really talked too much about specific acting performances, maybe just sort of wrap up with sort of some quick talk on that. But then again, I'm not too sure what more to add, per se. I mean, Cox was all right. I mean, he's an angry Brian Cox. Yeah. That's what he does.
That's what I, paid money to see, and I was not bothered by.
Yeah, it wasn't bothered with this. I mean, Guy Weiss as Héra, again, if the character is kind of like, what can you do and all that, effective, but not, I don't think, I would say Lorraine, I forget her last name again, I just read it, as Olwen was kind of had more of a gravitas as an actor in terms of what Guy Weiss was doing. I was sort of like more interested in seeing her on screen, oddly enough, and hearing her, so, but Weiss was all right, I suppose.
Yeah, the problem, she's not given anything to really shine with.
Yeah.
Because Héra's dialogue is all very like, we must not give in to hope or despair. Whatever. It kind of doesn't matter what she says.
Don't give in to hope.
Like, oh, father, oh, papa, and we mustn't give in to despair. And, oh, they're coming. Like, it's all that kind of thing. There's nothing that it feels like a character would say. It feels like a dialogue option. Right, and she's not. So I feel like I can't judge her performance when she isn't given anything.
Yeah. No, that's a very fair way of looking at it. And as Oriana, Pasqualino as Wolf is, again, he's just an insult done wrong, but, doing things there. So,
no shade to Luke. Rivals was really fun, by the way. If you guys are looking for a TV show, I think it's on Hulu.
Yeah, it's on Hulu. David Tennant's in too.
Yep.
Check it out.
I do think Pasqualino, even though the character isn't really well written, but what there is, he does give it his all, I think.
Yeah. No, that's
again,
fair. Yeah.
It's not much, but it's slightly more than Héra is given.
You know who I did like, actually? I liked Hama, I believe, the younger brother,
the sensitive boy,
the sensitive poet boy. I kind of liked him. And his voice actor, whose name is escaping me, but he was just like such a sensitive little boy. He was a boy for Wells. Wells for boys. Wells for boys.
He needed a well to stare into.
He did, and play his music.
Yeah.
I enjoyed that. I actually kind of wish that the story had spent a little more time on the family dynamic before we kind of plunged into there are so many other places to cut. I think that you could really give time to that family dynamic, and maybe the siblings are do have a slightly more contentious relationship with their father. They don't like that he's kind of a bully, and Héra is sort of torn because Wolf is a nice guy that she likes, but she doesn't want to marry him, and yet she also hates her dad's response to this, and it's good complex feelings there that everyone could have chewed over, but we didn't really. What we did get was good. I liked their interactions before.
Yeah, the screenplay does constantly shy away from anything complicated in terms of emotion.
Yeah,
it's very not even cliched. It's just like we need to get from point A to point B. What's the straightest emotional line possible? And that's not how events work.
Yeah. Yeah, it's especially I just finished watching Say Anything, which is another good show. But that actually, the idea that you have devoted your entire being and your youth and everything to a cause, which theoretically Wolf could have been doing, as in the Dunlendings deserve a leader of their own, a land of their own, and I am the one to do it, and then slowly realizing that oh, I am actually the problem. I am actually bringing them great suffering, and they do not want this. Again, that could have been really interesting, but no.
Yeah, or even something with Héra. I'm not saying she would. This also feels like a cliche character arc, but she could start out as a maybe a more typical princess, and then grow into what we see her at the end of the movie as, which is somebody who's like, you know what, I'm kind of done being in Rohan, I'm leaving. Which would have been powerful if that hadn't been her exact vibe the entire time.
Yeah, pretty much, And the fact that she went off to, she and Olwen go off to become like the new... I was wondering where you're going to think about that one, okay? So what do you want to say,
I forgot about this plot point.
We
need
to talk about the ending of this movie.
We do. We need to wrap up. It's getting close to time, so we need to... Let's go to the ending. Let's tackle the ending. Oriana, take the lead.
Why? Oh my god. Okay, a thing popped up on my Zoom screen that said playing music? ?
You're so tuneful.
So tuneful. Set up professional audio and audio settings. Oh my gosh, thank you, Zoom. But no, why do we need Saruman being, introduced and then the weird, like, I'm going to see a wizard and it's Gandalf, come on.
What does even I would have liked the Saruman moment if it had been expanded on more. And I know they could, because they wanted to kind of, puppet Christopher Lee's corpse for a bit.
Man,
they
that
couldn't
was so
really
depressing.
lean into it. But because Rohan has just been through the worst year ever, they could have leaned into like, oh, Saruman is here. This is great. He will save us, which is kind of how it works I think more in the story. That's kind of implied to be what happened, where Saruman shows up and is like, I'm here. I'll handle, you guys fix whatever, I'll handle the border, basically.
Yeah, pretty much.
And they didn't really do that, so it feels a little bit like a chance to use Christopher Lee's voice, and not as a story thing. It's just kind of like, we did a cameo.
And then we have Héra and Olwen giving each other just enough of a look in the eye. Hint, hint. It seemed like that's what the vibes they were trying to go for. It's like, okay, are you really pushing it here at this point? What's going on here? So that was kind of what I was trying to figure out, if they're trying to actually sort of sneak in something. Not quite a Kurosami moment, but...
like Carol?
Yeah, maybe.
It's a huge... That's a
Christmas movie. I'm here. But no, honestly, the vibe I also almost... Yes, exactly. So, but honestly, more the vibe is sort of half joking earlier. It's like, are they running off to be like the new companions for Doctor Who here? That was kind of the feeling of it.
Yeah, like they're going to go talk to Gandalf about orcs picking up rings, which at this point, Gandalf doesn't care about.
Man,
he doesn't think about this until Bilbo has the ring, which is way later.
That was an odd little thing. He did give us Billy Boyd and Dominic Monaghan doing their best Andy Serkis as Cockney Orcs imitation, so I'll allow for that, but that was kind of whatever.
I will not allow it. I will not allow this.
Never mind. Disallowed. So
they could have gotten them to do other voices.
No, it's fine. That's whatever.
Yeah, there it is. So, well, let's wrap up. Let's wrap this up since it's about time for us. We should bring it to a close. So, final thoughts from you both on this thing. Anything else to throw in?
It was fine. I don't know.
No, I think it's so time to move past the Jackson crew.
I think it would have. I know you're supposed to. I know you're supposed to talk about the movie you were given, not the movie you wish had been made. But I think it would have been great if maybe we had a little prologue in this style of Eowyn talking to her, whoever she's talking to. And then the rest of it is like Secret of Kells type thing, where it's like clearly it's a mythical space.
Yeah. I am with you on that.
Just rehashing the Jackson stuff. But again, that's not what we were given. It's unfair to go. They should have made a massive creative choice entirely differently.
And I think I'll just, if I have to wrap it up, I'll just say this. Last few days, a lot of people have been mainlining, talking about, it's time for my rewatch. I'm rewatching the original trilogy, watching the Jackson Lord of the Rings trilogy, and I'm thinking it's sort of like, this film, right from its start, right from the opening credits, was trying to give you that same sort of thing, the style of the credits, the style of the music, like, here we go, let's take you back into the world. They want to make that happen. And yet at the end, do I see people adding this to their rotation with the 3 live-action films? I kind of can't see it. It'll be on streaming soon enough, and if people do, they will. And maybe it'll find a new life and appreciation there. It's one of those things that you don't have to go out to the theater, you just simply watch it at home and go like, oh yeah. So, and things like that. But we'll end there. Okay, looking ahead to the next episode, the choice of topic has come around to Oriana. Oriana, what are we talking about?
Despair.
Okay.
The big one.
We're
Or
just,
one of them.
I haven't like fully narrowed it down yet, but despair and it's and hope. It feels like a good time to be thinking about both of those things and how Tolkien thought of both in his work.
Lord knows there are examples of it, and Lord knows there are quotes and adaptations of quotes in adaptations, but we'll get to that too, I'm sure. So with that said, yes, the upcoming year. So we wish everyone lots of hope and as least despair as possible as we get through it all. We're all in this together, but we will see where it all goes. But by the time you get this, it will be hopefully a happy-ish new year for you all, and you've done that, and we'll go forward from there. So we thank you all very much for listening, as always. We deeply appreciate it. You can find us, of course, on Blue Sky, By-The-Bywater, and you can also find the three of us there individually. Of course, you can also go to megaphonic.fm/By-The-Bywater for our full page listings. There's the episode guide. And, of course, you can always email us at bythebywater@gmail.com. Thank you very much for listening, especially if you're our newer listeners in recent times. We appreciate that. People who are starting to follow us on Blue Sky and elsewhere. We hope you've enjoyed what we've been doing. We look forward to another year of episodes and thoughts and reflections as there's more things to think about when it comes to the work. That's why we're here. And with that said, we'll talk to you all next time. Until then.